We are in our summer series, Audience Choice, and these are all the questions, all the topics that you have wanted to talk about for the summer. Received many questions, many topics, couldn't actually address every single one of them. We just had a 2-week one that we just finished up on the armor of God. If you haven't had a chance to check those two out, you can go back into the archive and you can find those. Today, we have another question from you, from the audience. Here's the question. Should I read it really slow in case you want to write it down? Eventually, here's what's going to happen, because this has happened many times before. There's like 15 people up there working on the projector, and so that cord we have to bring up there. That's the one, yes, well, okay. Oh, he got it. Okay, cool, got it. So eventually, at some point, what's going to happen is this screen will come on, and then you'll have all the verses and everything and all the notes. Now, here's the question for us this morning. What chapter references God's ordained purpose for the stars and constellations? What I want to do is I want to broaden that question a bit to ask the question, what is God's plan or God's purpose for the universe? What is God's plan? What is God's purpose for the universe? And spoiler, that includes you as well. What does God desire to see for all creation? And we have to start this morning with another question, because if you've learned anything about how I try teaching, it's by going through a question after a question after a question, because that's typically how I read the Bible. I read something, I have a question about what it is that I'm reading, and then I go explore that question. That's the reason why I gave you the opportunity to present your questions, because how do you learn more about the Bible? How do you study the Bible? What's one of the best ways to study the Bible? Come up with all the different questions that you can find as you're reading Scripture. Whenever you're reading something, keep a list on the side. Here's all the questions that I have while I'm reading this passage, and then you go after those questions. The more you explore those questions, the deeper into the person of God, I guarantee you will go. And you will come to discover more about God, God's purpose for you, and how the Spirit is leading you in your life. So questions when you read the Bible are a very, very good thing. The question for us again this morning, what is God's purpose for all creation? Let's first begin here. How does God view creation? We will begin in the very, very beginning, because the beginning always seems like the perfect place to start. Genesis 1, the opening pages of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then as you go through Genesis 1, this is like a poem. Think of it like a song where you have all these different verses, and then there's the chorus. And in a song, in a typical song, what repeats again and again and again? Is it the verse or the chorus? All right, some of you are music lovers. Some of you understand music. Yes, it is the chorus that repeats again and again. Normally, if you listen to a song on the radio, the chorus happens to be very catchy. You might find yourself singing a chorus of a song. Maybe if you have kids, you hear your kids singing a chorus of a particular song. In Genesis 1, we have verses. All throughout, there's a chorus. And what is the repeated phrase in the chorus? And God saw that it was good. God saw that it was good. This is all throughout Genesis 1. God creates heavens, ocean, planet, stars, trees, birds, animals. In the midst of all of it, after every creative act, God looks and sees that it was good. Well, then we get to humans. We get to humanity, you and me. And it's not just good. Instead, it is, any guesses? It is very good. Creation is good, and then you were created. Your brothers and sisters were created, and it was then very good. Now, in Genesis 1, creation includes everything that you can see. Stars, planets, oceans, universe, you. It's all good. You happen to be very good. Now, this word good is the Hebrew word tov. All right, eventually we'll get there. Now, tov can be translated as good, but here's a few other ways this word can be translated. God looked and God saw that it was good, pleasant, agreeable, beneficial, beautiful. God saw it was the best, it was better, bountiful, cheerful, fair, favor, fine, glad, goodly, graciously, joyful, kindly, loving, merry, pleasant, precious, prosperity. I see some of you trying to take notes. Don't worry, I can send those slides so you don't have to write very, very fast. It was sweet. It was well favored. When God looks and sees creation, God sees that it was good, it was pleasant, it was beautiful, it was favored. How does God view all creation? As something beautiful, something well favored. Let's look at another verse. In order to answer this question, how does God view the universe? Probably a verse that many of us know. John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world. World in the Greek is the word cosmos. How does God view the universe, the world, through the lens of love? For God so loved all creation. What is God's posture toward creation? This creation is beautiful. It's good. It's favored. It is deserving and worthy of love. Let's look at one more verse. This one happens to be in the book of Job, chapter 38. Toward the end of this book, Job has been questioning God. Now, toward the end of this book, God begins to answer Job from a whirlwind. And God's response to Job in the midst of all these questions that Job is launching at God, God says, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy." I love this verse. God is speaking to Job. He's saying, you are a puny human. Can you really comprehend and understand the majesty of it all? Where were you when the earth was being formed? In that moment, the stars sang together. The stars, at the moment of creation, as the earth was being, what did I tell you? I told you eventually it was just going to come on. I was looking at my Magic 8 Ball a little bit earlier here. God says, the morning stars sang together. Why do you sing? Joy. The angels shouted for joy. The beginning of creation, as all things were being formed and coming into fruition. The stars were singing. The angels were filled with joy. So what is God's fundamental posture toward all creation, including you and me? Pleasure, joy, and love. This is our starting point. What is God's plan? What is God's purpose for all creation, including you? Well, we have to first start at the beginning. When God looks at creation, when God looks at your life and everything within this universe, it's through the lens of pleasure, joy, and love. Now, if we know the story of the Bible, we have Genesis 1. Everything is in its right place. There's harmony, there's wholeness, this word shalom that we've been looking at over the past couple of weeks. But then after Genesis 1 comes Genesis 3. And Genesis 3 is the beginning of the breaking of that wholeness. There's that moment when everything is in harmony, but then things begin to go off the tracks. In Genesis 3, we have the introduction of sin, death, decay, brokenness, the distorting of the harmony or the goodness that existed earlier in the story. We have Genesis 1, and then the breaking of the beautiful picture that we're given in the beginning. And this breaking, this disruption, it affects all creation. It affects us, and it affects every single particle of creation. Now, at this point in the story, God is left with two choices. And I would argue that there are two competing narratives for what it is that God's desire for our creation is. The first choice that God is left with is God could let all creation be destroyed. God could burn it all. God could abandon this creation. God could give up on this beautiful creation. God could destroy this good, pleasant, favored creation. God could start all over again, wipe the slate clean, and begin again. Or, and that's one narrative, or here's a second narrative. God could redeem. God could restore that which has been broken, that which has been affected by the distortion of sin and decay. God could rejoin back together all the brokenness that we experience in our lives. God could resurrect. We have, and these two narratives are swirling around in Christian circles today. We have one narrative that says, this creation is flawed, let's escape here, let's go somewhere else, so that God can then start all over again, wipe the slate clean, and destroy this beautiful creation that God has loved and God is invested in. Or God could restore and redeem the brokenness. Which then raises the question for us, well, before we get there, actually, which view you hold to, it matters. If you believe in God is going to destroy this creation, start again, that belief matters. Or if you believe God is going to redeem, restore, resurrect this creation, it matters because it shapes your belief about who God is, how God acts in the world. And it shapes what you believe about how you are to live in response to the type of God that you believe in. So beliefs matter because beliefs fuel action. Beliefs fuel a response. What is the grounding truth of the Christian faith? It's an empty tomb. There are two narratives going around. One says, let's do everything we can, let's be as religious as we possibly can to escape here so we can go somewhere else. And that's a very popular narrative. And then there's a second way of viewing God's purpose for creation. And it's rooted here, in this place, in this creation. And it's the belief that God has not given up on this creation. And the goal is not to escape and go somewhere else, but rather the intent is to work with the Spirit to bring restoration and resurrection and redemption to this creation that God has already established as something that is good and beautiful and favored. Yes, some things have gone askew, but that doesn't mean that God is giving up on this creation. Now, for the New Testament writers, they were trying to work out what the resurrection of Jesus meant. There was this pivotal moment in history when God came in the flesh in the person of Jesus, and then death was not the end, but rather death was a new beginning of sorts. It was a resurrection. And I'd argue that a resurrection affirms the goodness of this creation. The fact that Jesus was bodily resurrected, it affirms the goodness of your body. It affirms God's commitment to this creation. Jesus didn't die and then leave and that's it, gone forever. Rather, Jesus rose, walked on this earth in bodily form, affirming that God is committed to this place. God is committed to you, and the resurrection of Jesus affirms God's never-ending pursuit of restoration. You have Genesis 1, everything is in harmony, wholeness, order. Genesis 3, and then the rest of the story kind of shows the results of that decay, but God is present throughout all of it, bringing restoration and bringing resurrection, and attempting to bring humanity and all creation back into the harmony that existed in the beginning of the story. So here's a few verses within the New Testament of how these writers were trying to make sense of everything. Romans 8, I consider our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Yes, life is difficult. You've all had moments of suffering. You've all had moments of hardship. We've all experienced this before. Paul is acknowledging that life can be ruthless and extremely difficult. Even as a follower of Jesus, it doesn't mean that your life is going to be endlessly easy. But rather, life presents challenges, struggles, hardships. Paul is acknowledging that, and he says, eventually we will get to this moment when there will be a glory that will ultimately be revealed in us. The creation, Paul is now expanding this. The creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed, for the creation as well was subjected to frustration. All creation has been affected by that which happened in Genesis 3. The decay, the destruction that we, through our own actions, inflict upon the universe. Have you ever seen the landscape that you've driven by littered with bottles and garbage? Think about the water that some of us get out of our faucets, water that has been polluted through chemicals, toxins from our usage of this universe. So in many different ways, we have been responsible for harming this creation, this universe that we all live in. Paul is acknowledging this and saying all creation is waiting to be restored. The rivers, the polluted land, waiting to be restored. I remember going to the Dominican Republic many, many years ago, and we went to the border between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Dominican Republic, you had trees. It was lush. You could see greenery everywhere. As soon as you got to that fence and you looked out over the landscape of Haiti, it was barren because all the greenery had been burned down prior. Creation is waiting in eager expectation for God to restore it, to redeem it, to put everything back in its rightful place. Creation, it's waiting for you and me to take our rightful place as children of God, to protect it, to care for it, to do our part in making sure that creation itself can flourish. And then Revelation 21, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven, the first earth had passed away. There was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem. And here's the point that I want you to see here. Coming which direction? This new city is coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. The movement is not up. There's many Christian narratives that perpetuate this story, this narrative. God is destroying. Let's go up and away and escape. But the picture that we're given at the end of the story is God coming down here. The movement is not escape, away, go elsewhere. Rather, the movement is here. This creation, this place, this beautiful universe that we all inhabit being restored to glory. You being restored to glory. Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer, Our Father in heaven, your kingdom come here to this place. Not take us to your kingdom, but rather may you bring a little piece of heaven here and show us how to do it on earth here in this creation as in heaven. Now, why does this matter? I understand this has been a bit theological. Maybe we're up here a bit heady. Let's bring it down to your life, because that's always what matters. We can talk about ideas all we want, but the truth is, let's talk a bit about action and our response. Why does this matter? Why does it matter which story we believe? Remember, belief fuels action. The dominant narrative that you believe, it will shape your view of God. And your view of God, who you believe God to be, will shape your life. If you believe God is a dominant tyrant, then that will shape how you live and how you see the world. If you believe that God is a loving, benevolent creator, that will also shape your life in a particular way. I would argue that the second way of viewing God is going to shape your life in a much better and more peaceful way. So, what you believe deeply, deeply matters. Let me introduce you to this Jewish phrase. Tikkun olam comes from the 2nd century, just shy of 2,000 years ago, and it means repairing the world. There was this idea that has existed for 2,000 years within the Jewish tradition that God is actively at work repairing the world. When we think about Jesus, Jesus comes and actively, through his death on a cross, God was doing something, restoring and repairing, beginning that process. Tikkun olam is all about God actively repairing the world and then us playing our role. This is from an author, Brian Zond. Christianity's first apostles evangelized not by signing people up for an apocalyptic evacuation. Unfortunately, these are the stories that you might hear in the New York subway system. These are the stories that you see people holding on a billboard on the sign of a street. Repent, believe, let's go away. But this is not what the New Testament is about. This is not what the first followers of Jesus were all about. They were not about signing people up to a belief system that took them away from this world, but rather by announcing the arrival of a new world order. You've seen what life looks like under the Roman Empire. Even though the Roman Empire isn't in existence today, we all know what life can feel like with an empire that is consumed with building wealth, exploiting the poor, invading other countries, amassing crazy amounts of power. What the first Christian said is that is not the best way to live. That is not the best way to shape a society. See, the apostles understood the kingdom of God as a new arrangement of human society. I know this is what you've seen. I know this is what you hear on the news. This is the dominant story that's being presented to you, but there's another way to live. And there's another way to arrange society where Jesus is the world's true king, where the qualities of Jesus, mercy, grace, forgiveness, peace, when those are the true qualities that we are to pursue and to embody in our own lives. Put simply, because Jesus is Lord, the world is to be redeemed and not left in ruin. So we rethink our lives, not so we can escape a doomed planet, but in order to participate in God's design to redeem the human person. We participate, we give our lives to bringing restoration and wholeness to the world now. We are turning our backs on all those ways of living that bring death, decay, and destruction to creation and to humanity, and we embody a new way of living, the way of resurrection, of hope, of redemption, and rejoining, working to bring harmony and wholeness to this creation. What is God's plan for the universe? The question that we started with, restoring it. So the question for us, our response then is, where can you today, where can you join with God's saving, redeeming, restoring work? This is the invitation of Jesus. As a follower of Jesus, we're saying we are putting our trust in Jesus, in his way of life, in the message that he speaks over us, and then we are learning to follow his footsteps, to embody his way of being in the world. Jesus was all about wholeness and peace and restoring that which was lost. We looked at this last week. Have your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. We said peace was not the absence of violence, but rather peace was a filling of wholeness, of harmony. Everywhere you walk, you are to bring the wholeness that God desires. How can you rejoin? How can you bring resurrection to this world? First, in your own life. Is there any brokenness that you're living with? Is there any sin that you're carrying within you and it is producing decay, death, rot within your soul? The invitation is to turn your back on that way of living and to embrace the new, the way of resurrection. Where can you join God's saving work in your life this morning? Is there anything that you feel within you right now that you are being invited to leave behind because it's not serving you well? It's not leading you down the path of resurrection that you truly desire, the path of wholeness for you and those around you. Where can you join God's saving, redeeming work in your relationships? Relationships are messy. It's part of the human experience. In any way, are your actions leading to a rupture? Are your words, your thoughts, are they creating disharmony around you? Is there any way of being that you can leave behind, or any new way of being that you can embrace? Where you look at your feet every morning and see, okay, I got my shoes, the gospel of peace. How can you go and bring wholeness to all the situations that you find yourself in? Family relations. Maybe you need to reach out to someone and offer words of forgiveness. Take some ownership for ways in which you have broken a relationship or you've contributed to that brokenness. God's desire is restoration, restoring, redemption. How can you move that purpose along in your relationships? What about in your community? Are there any examples of areas within your community that are broken? Something is wrong. Things do not exist in harmony and order. And through your actions, you can begin putting some of the pieces back together. We might call this social activism. It's you going and making a difference in the world. Putting that which has been broken back together. Making sure that others have access to some of the things that you simply take for granted. I would argue that hunger, God is not for hunger. And I love Feeding Westchester as just one example that comes to mind right now, because they are committed to making sure that no one in Westchester goes hungry. We've partnered with Harlem Grown in the Bronx before. Organizations that look at what is broken in the systems around us and they say, this is wrong, this is not God's desire, and we are going to do something about it. I would argue that followers of Jesus should be those who go into our communities and attempt to join back together the brokenness that we see around us. How can we bring the peace of God, the love of Christ to our neighborhoods? Where can you join God's saving, restoring, redeeming work in the larger world that we inhabit? We are all connected. We're connected to each other, and we're also connected to the creation. About 2 years ago, I got a call from New York State. They said, we're going around your neighborhood, and we are testing all the water in these houses here, because there was a landfill about 4 or 5 miles up the road. And we have come to discover that the landfill was leaching chemicals into the water. They were testing all the water to make sure that it hadn't reached a certain threshold of chemicals. See, what we do matters. How we live matters. It's not just about you, but your actions have a ripple effect upon others and upon the creation. So a land spill 5 miles up the street, it affected me and all my neighbors. Your actions have that effect upon the world as well. You can work to restore and put back together, or your actions can contribute to the ongoing brokenness that we see in the world. What is God's purpose for this creation, for all humanity? It's restoration, redemption. Rather than trying to escape and to go somewhere else, the invitation of Jesus is to commit your life to the here and now, to this creation, to the goodness that is inherent to the creation that we see all around us. The goodness that is inherent within each and every one of us. I would argue it's our role, it's our job as a follower of Jesus to bring the goodness of others out of them and to bring restoration and wholeness to the world. Let's live as if the tomb truly is empty. And as if we believe that God is committed to you and this creation.